Hello ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by Shared Services Link in association with EXL Service. I'm very pleased to be presenting this webinar today. We're going to be looking at the 7 rules of analytics within your Shared Services organization. So my name is Susie West. I'm the founder and CEO at Shared Services Link, and I'm very pleased to be presenting as my expert speakers David Stilko, who is Vice President of Operations at Blue Links Media, and Vince Sparrow, who's Vice President Client Executive at EXL Service. You, of course, have a vital role to play in what you get out of today's hour, which is to make sure that you have your questions answered, please. So you will have on your GoToWebinar panel a question box. Please do enter your question into that box and submit that to me. The sooner you submit that question, the more likely it is to be asked, and I'll be taking all of your questions and putting your questions to our speakers in the last 10 minutes of the webinar. Let's have a look at the agenda for the next 60 minutes. So I'll be touching really on the context and the intention of this session, and then I'll be handing over to Vince and to David, who will be talking about the results of the survey that this webinar is based on, and David will be touching on the 7 rules that you really need to be applying as far as analytics is concerned within your shared services organization. We'll then be handing back to Vince for a brief summary and then moving to questions. So let's have a look at the context for this. Many of you are Shared Services Link members, and you would have been asked to participate in a survey, a study in the last few months, which is specifically on analytics within the shared services world. And as many of you will be very familiar, analytics has been a key subject for not just shared services but business in general over the last few years. We're all waking up to the fact that we're sitting on huge amounts of data, but what some of us are good at and some of us are not so good at is really interpreting that data and using that data to tell a useful story on which we can base some real game-changing decisions. And what shared services is really looking at, and what the study really examined, was how can we actually look at the data effectively, and how can we make sure that analytics is working for us within our shared services environment. So this is really, for the next hour, we're going to be looking at the results of that study and the 3 key findings that came out of that study, and then looking at the 7 rules that you really do need to take into account when practicing analytics within shared services. Just before I hand over to our first speaker, though, I would like to kick off with our first of 3 polls for today. So coming up on your screen very shortly is the following question. We'd like to know, please, what are you looking to take away from today's webinar? Please tick the 1 box that applies to your own situation. Is it to learn more about analytics in order to build a business case or a case for change? To understand analytics in order to appreciate the potential future use? To find ways to improve your existing analytics projects? To learn about analytics solution providers? Or perhaps you're just following general developments within the world of analytics and just really exploring analytics today? We like to get the responses up to 70%. We're only at 56% of you responding. So if you haven't already done so, please do tick the box appropriate to you. I'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, good, thank you. We're at 73% of you responding there. Let's have a look at the results. It'll be very interesting for us to study these. So 65% of you say, or 65% of you said that you wanted to understand analytics in order to understand the potential for the future, followed by 48% to understand ways or find ways to improve your existing analytics projects. So that suggests that just shy of half of you are already doing some kind of analytics initiatives within your organization. Coming in at 28%, so in 3rd place, Those are just exploring, 25% to learn more about analytics to actually build a case for change, and 20% of you to find out about analytics solution providers. So good. Thank you very much indeed. So now I'd like to please hand over to our first presenter, Vince Sparrow. Over to you, please, Vince.
Thank you, Susie, and hello to our participants. First thing we want to cover is a little bit of background on the survey in terms of who our respondents are. Not surprisingly, they are largely people in the finance and accounting organization. So you see on the screen today, right now, that 23% of respondents were vice presidents or directors of shared services, and many also had finance roles, so finance director, manager, accounts payable manager, or director. But also we have a smattering of people who are performance analysts and analytics managers. Very important. I think that's a trend actually we'll see increasing in the future. So about 85% of our respondents work in finance shared services or centralized finance function. And I think we'll see as we go through here that does color at least some of our results. So let's move forward to our first key trend, which is that, again, not surprisingly, there is significant growth, both recently and expected, growth in the use of analytics. Hardly surprising. It's gotten a lot of attention, and now we're going to talk about a little bit how that works and how organizations are viewing analytics. Where are they today in that analytics roadmap? Today, as you see, about 39% of organizations are pursuing analytics on an enterprise-wide basis. My view is that's likely to include what we can call big data, use of big data. So a lot of very large databases to look at, primarily sales and marketing related opportunities and revenue opportunities. And then if you look at the next box down, department initiative, again, remembering that our respondents are like our primarily finance and accounting organization people, this is not surprising either. Finance and accounting people are by their nature analytical. So I think we'll see that initiative will expand. I think we can talk about how people are actually using analytics today. We'll get to that. And then we can differentiate between the big data, which is more outward-facing, and the inward-facing, what's called small data, which will nonetheless be important. The other thing that I wanted to comment on is I do believe that shared services organizations can both do analytics on the functions they manage, in the future can also provide analytical support on a broader basis to their organizations, including getting into perhaps understanding big data and predicting directions of customers, etc. All right. So where's analytics being used today? Let's talk about how organizations are using analytics today. 70% of our respondents use analytics in finance and accounting today, but only half are using analytics in procurement. We were a little bit surprised with the results, but then again, remember my earlier comment, our respondents are all or primarily in the finance and accounting functions. So it's not surprising that they're using it in finance and accounting. A little bit surprising they're not using much in procurement, but perhaps that's because of their focus. So I think we'll see if you took more of an enterprise view, that more people are using analytics in procurement. The other things that are interesting to note here is the percentage of sales and marketing functions using analytics. This is where I primarily look to see the use of big data. So taking very large databases, looking at potential customers and how we're using that. We see that in many of our clients as they use big data to do predictive studies. So there's things like insurance companies looking at claims processing, health insurance companies looking at health outcomes. So before we move on to the next stage, David, have you on your experience on services and how it's being used?
Yes, thank you, Vince, and hello, everyone. The shared service arena really bridges across all of these functions, especially as you think about procure to pay, order to cash, and hire to retire. So something to keep in mind is if you want to be truly effective and, more importantly, relevant as part of the organization that you work in, you have to engage across all the functions that touch your processes by analyzing and improving them as you go. This will help to establish credibility It'll gain you a seat at the table, and it will allow you to use influence, because in the shared services arena, we rarely have authority, but we have the ability to have an incredible amount of influence. And that influence comes from us thinking across the functions, but also doing very strong and accurate analytics and utilizing that to share with decision makers, yielding us great levels of influence.
Okay, thanks, David. So let's turn now to the question of how analytics can help. So 82% of our audience recognize that analytics can help decision making, and over half understand that we can use it to predict future performance. I think that, again, primarily because we've got an F&A audience, historically they've been using information and analytics to make decisions, and that's not surprising. I think as we see the future, we're going to see an increase in the percentage of use of analytics to help predict the future, to model, various marketing programs, to model the impact of various programs on, customers and then production and receivables, et cetera. So I think those are very important uses. Again, I think, David, I think you've got some experience that you can share here.
Right. The key here, echoing a little from the previous slide, is we have to remember we're not just talking about the decision-making process within the shared service organization, but we're talking about the overall business decision-making process. So while we want to do strong analytics for our processes ourselves, we also want to make sure that we're relevant to the decision makers and the leaders across the functions.
Okay, great. So let's go on and talk about how decisions are being made. And again, not surprisingly, because of our audience, this is a group of people, I would include myself in this, who want data. Just give me the facts so that I can make a recommendation, so I can help you decide which force to go, what the probabilities of success are going to be. So we're all comfortable, I think, with using data and facts, and we can talk. I know David's got some thoughts on this as well. So we can talk about that. Data and facts kind of give you the current direction, the facts. You can use those to both look within the function, also communicate with the rest of the organization. And past experiences are also relevant. And obviously, some of that has to do with the facts that we've seen, historical facts, and they go back over some period of time, set trends. The really interesting use of data going forward is going to be in predictive analysis. So what if we do this, then what? And that's I think the real strength of the big data, and where we see market trends going and what that means for our organizations. David, I think you've got some experiences here too. You want to share some?
Absolutely. One of the things I want to emphasize here, specifically in the shared service arena, is we sometimes get stuck working really, really hard, and we work really, really hard on the same defects over and over again. And we really can use metrics, patterns, and predictive analytics in understanding what is happening in a process, why it's happening in the process, and finding ways that we can change the process. And most of you are probably familiar with the Drucker quote that says, "There's nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency something that should not be done at all." So use analytics at times to find the things that you're doing that you shouldn't be doing at all, and try to eliminate those defects. Oftentimes the defects occurring before your process starts. So look for opportunities there.
Okay, thanks, David. Let's move on and talk about our second major trend, and that is that organizations may be underestimating the potential use of analytics to improve the F&A processes themselves. So it's a potential. How are you already using it today? And I think, Susie, it's time for a polling question.
That's great. Many thanks indeed, Vince. So coming up on your screen now is the second poll question for the day, please. Are you looking at implementing analytics in the following processes? Please tick all that apply. Procure to pay or purchase to pay, order to cash, record to report, other, or perhaps you're not yet looking, or you're not today actually doing analytics in any specific processes. So are you looking at implementing analytics in the following processes? Please tick all that apply: purchase to pay, order to cash, record to report, other, or perhaps none of them apply because you're not actively looking at specific processes today. 61% of you have voted, so if you haven't already done so, please do so. As I mentioned, we do like to try and get this number up to about 70. So if we can have a few more votes, please. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, we're at 66% of you responding there. So let's have a look at the data coming up on your screen now. So the clear winner, I would say, is 43% purchase to pay, procure to pay. Then followed by 36% of you saying other. So it'd be interesting to know what processes you have in mind. And then 33% record to report, 21% order to cash, 19% of you saying you're not looking at specific processes just yet. Interesting results there. Back to you, please, Vince.
All right, thanks, Susie. Yeah, they are interesting results. I'm a little surprised at the order to cash. I think that's lower than I would have predicted. So let's move on and look first at procure to pay and what areas people see being used today in terms of potential impact using analytics. So, the first one is, again, not surprising, spend analytics. And that is, where are we spending money? How many vendors are we using? Are we spending, do we have maverick spend? So are we using, the business units using vendors who are not approved, with whom we don't have contracts, et cetera? So that's a really important area when you see both shared services organizations with a financial expense management bent, plus also procurement organizations or sourcing organizations involved. And I think related to that, the percentage here of 57% for purchase order processing, again, is not surprising. I think we look at it a little bit differently in the finance organization compared to procurement. In finance, we look at it from the standpoint of payable processing and efficiency. So again, I don't think this is a big data application. This is a little data application. But what is our first pass acceptance rate in processing purchase orders or processing invoices related to purchase orders? And what does that tell us about the underlying procurement process and our vendors? Are they complying with our purchase order requirements? Are we issuing purchase order requirements on a regular basis? I just share one quick story. I had a client tell me once that they used 100% purchase order processing. So all invoices had a purchase order. But what they meant was in many cases, they issued a purchase order after they received the invoice. And that was an interesting revelation. I think proved that they really didn't understand the process or how it might be used most effectively. So David, do you have some comments, some examples from your experience?
Yeah, just looking at a simple piece of shared service review here on cash discount optimization. I think generally speaking, everybody tends to look at, when I have a cash discount available, do I take it? And that is certainly a very important metric to understand. But one of the things when you start really engaging with the procurement team and engaging across the function is really to look at, where do we have discounts available and where do we not have discounts available, and to really understand why that is. What are the types of suppliers who allow discounts? What are the types of suppliers who don't, and why is that? But also in working with them, when you look at the cash discount rate and looking at the finance aspect of that and making sure that it's a value to the organization. So again, don't be afraid to engage all the way across the function, even on things as small as looking at the availability of cash discounts and working with your procurement team.
Yeah, that's a great example and an easy way, I think, to impact the bottom line as well. I did an analysis like this for one customer where we discovered that we weren't making a lot of discounts, or we weren't taking discounts. That was largely because the vendor invoices weren't getting to the shared services organization on a timely basis. It's hard to take a discount if you're not getting the invoice to the shared services environment until 15 days later. So Anyway, let's move on to record report and how we're using analytics in that area. So again, not surprisingly, account reconciliation is the biggest opportunity, how people are using it today. And I look for, the kinds of things I look for in account reconciliation is what types of reconciling items do we have? How many of them recur month after month after month? And that tells me something about the underlying process. Is there an issue here? Is this just a timing difference that we expect to recur? Or is this an indication that there's a problem with the underlying process that could be optimized? The other thing I look at, and I know David, you've got some comments on this one too, is I look at the aging. Do we have a reconciling item that appears every month, but yet goes back many, many months, or sometimes even longer than that? And that tells me we're not really going back and clearing up things. I want to do that for purposes of obviously streamlining the entire process, both the reconciliation process, but also making sure that we have the accounting right. So the other thing we look at here is project cost accounting. You might be able to use that to compare and contrast potential costing issues. So again, look across projects, look across the costing of various projects or services to see if there's potential issues with costing by location or by business. All right, so we're going to move on now to the order to cash area, which, as I said before, from our polling results, I was a little surprised that people didn't think it was going to be all that important. Because the first and foremost thing I see, both from this and from my experience working with multiple clients, is that the whole focus of analytics and order to cash is on getting the cash, right? Getting cash in the door. And that's primarily collections, but it could also be, cash applications issues, but primarily collections. So what do our analytics tell us about customer behavior, how we can change the behavior, and then also, how do we use our collections effort differently based on the kind of client it is, the kind of customer, et cetera. So that's an important thing. As I said, I was a little bit surprised before that people didn't think that was as important to use analytics for. And the other area, which David, I know you've had some recent experience with, is the unapplied cash. So I'm going to share that result and how that helped the organization.
Yes, and this is kind of a unique example, and I want to use this to be illustrative of kind of some nuggets that you can find if you really do dig in and you do some stronger analytics, because this is something that we ended up finding by really kind of shredding the data, but we really didn't think that this is what we would find. So we started looking simply at unapplied cash, where we did have some challenges, and we worked on cleaning it up. And in the process of cleaning it up, what we learned was we had a large volume of duplicate payments. Whenever we looked at that and we thought about duplicate payments across the breadth of our organization, one of the things we started to think about was, hey, rather than just handing all of this money back to the customers, can we work with the sales organization and utilize those duplicate payments to produce revenue? So one of our options, obviously, again, as a shared service organization, was, well, just give everybody a refund, which would have been effective and accurate to reducing unapplied cash, but would have robbed really the sales organization of an opportunity. So what we've done is we've shared that information with them and given them kind of an entree into speaking to their customers and potentially gaining revenue from them. One area where this is particularly important, and we were able to go in and evaluate this, was where we had a duplicate payment on someone who really was no longer a customer. So they were no longer purchasing from us, and we were able to use that and give that to the sales organization, potentially, again, to initiate a new call on that customer and maybe restart the revenue stream. I'm happy to say, or maybe sad to say, but we found about $1 million worth of those embedded within the work that we did. So it's a very significant opportunity. And again, the point I want to emphasize here is that's kind of a nugget that comes out of really good, solid analytics that we absolutely had no idea was there whenever we started down the path.
Yeah. And David, I think that also is not only a nugget, but potentially a real, opportunity for a shared services organization, not just to, as you said, issue a credit or send a check to a customer who's duplicate paid, but to reach out to the sales organization and really put kind of a revenue generation hat on shared services and say, here's one opportunity. Go out and talk to this customer, see if they want to do something with us, and obviously, if we need to cut them a check, we're happy to do it. But in the meantime, look at the opportunity to create revenue. And David, if you just kind of I think I know the answer, but what was the reaction of the sales organization when you reached out to them and said, hey, what do you think about this?
Well, their first reaction was that they were stunned that we thought about them, but they're starting to get kind of used to that. And then I will cover some of this on one of the later slides, but we had to really work through it with them and help them understand exactly what we had so that we could then move forward. And they are working this right now as we speak.
Yep. The other thing I want to comment on this slide before we move on is the interrelationship between billing and invoicing, order capture, and dispute deduction and management. So again, this is just an opportunity to look at the data, get behind it, understand, is there an issue in the upfront or the upstream processes that's leading to these disputes, that leading to credits, etc. And can we improve that process in the front end to improve the customer experience and also to make the back-end processes more efficient. Let's move on and talk about analytics in SG&A, or how do you apply it. Many customers, this kind of surprised me. Look at the results, 43% of our respondents don't use analytics for SG&A. That surprised me because most organizations are always focused on, well, how can we do things better, faster, cheaper? So you see 20% are using analytics to benchmark SG&A related to peers and competitors, probably related to internal trends as well. That makes sense. I see that a lot in customers. But also they're using analytics to assess the efficiency of the SG&A processes. My experience with shared services, primarily on the finance side, is that the business units, the people out, the customer base within the company, are always looking at the efficiency of the SG&A, at least in terms of the shared services. So, how many AP invoices are we processing? How accurate are we? What's our cycle time? So that doesn't surprise me that 18% are using that. It surprised me that more than 18% aren't using that. And then, what else can we do to assess the effectiveness of SG&A? Can we look at it on a per person, per unit, per dollar spent basis? So a lot of things that you can do here. It did kind of surprise me that people weren't doing that. And I know if you look to a retail organization, they're looking at things like rent, and they're looking at revenue produced per square foot of space. So it strikes me as kind of odd that the respondents hadn't been doing this or hadn't been doing it as much. All right, let's move on to our next trend, which is how do you really make an analytics program more effective? What do you do? So let's talk about what's the biggest challenge in using analytics. I think the first challenge, personally, is understanding what analytics is. We've talked a little bit about big data versus little data, and my guess is that if we thought about it, all of us are using analytics in some way. We're looking at numbers, and I know from working with David closely over the years, you can look at numbers, and something can just pop out and say, this just doesn't look right. Or, David, apologize, I'll just quote you, this looks weird. So, what does this mean? Let's get behind that and understand that. So what are the biggest challenges? So we didn't have a lot of challenges in terms of, where to deploy analytics. It's kind of how do we get started. So no question about what to do, but kind of a question about where do we start. And I know there's a really important baseline assumption here that, David, I think you can cover and then talk about what your experience has been.
Right. One of the key things that I've learned over the years is we have to make sure that our data is complete and accurate. And I want to give you a really simple example of this, of where we got really hung up for a while. We were looking at our AR aging and our DSO reporting. Not super complicated stuff, but we kept looking at the information and we kept getting answers that didn't make any sense. So we really went back and started to pull back into the data. Where did it come from? You know, why was our report yielding these answers that didn't seem accurate and didn't make sense based off of what we were doing? And what we learned was, embedded within the report as it went through the process, they were actually calculating the customer terms instead of utilizing the terms from within our system. To further complicate that, the calculations were not accurate. There were actually 3 different calculations embedded across this reporting piece of analytics. So we really got extremely misleading information. It kept pointing us to areas where we either knew we didn't have a problem, or it didn't point us to areas where we knew we had a problem. So we worked with the reporting team and we cleaned up the report, which allowed us to get very accurate and very relevant pieces of analytics that then pointed us back to opportunities for us from a collection perspective, but it also pointed us back to some opportunities where we said, hey, these items are getting old, but they were getting old because we had, through the sales agreements and through dialogue with customers, actually extended the terms much longer than normal. So we were then able to say, hey, here's the opportunity broken out into buckets. Here's where the finance team has to do work, the collections team has to do work, and then here's where the sales organization has to do work. But that was a huge challenge for us, again, in an area we didn't necessarily expect. Oftentimes we assume the report we get is right, and it's good sometimes to pull back into there and look under the covers and figure out that maybe it's not.
Yeah, that's a good point, and we see this frequently with customers as one of their first areas is just to go do an assessment of how clean is their master data information. Because if it's not clean, that makes the rest of this a little more relevant and a little more a little less effective. So hard to do that. I think it's time for another polling question.
That's great. Many thanks, Vince. So coming up on your screen now, the third and final poll for the day. We're just curious to know how you're going to be going about driving through analytics within your organization. So please, I think it's just a single vote on this one. How will analytics be implemented within your organization? Do you have trained analytics experts in-house that you are using and relying on, that you will be bringing in consultants or third-party organizations to assist with this, that you will be implementing analytics without the aid of third parties or analysts, specialists, beg your pardon. None of the above. We are not looking to implement analytics just now. Only 51% of you have responded. As ever, we do like to get this response up to about 70%, please. So please do let us know how you're going about actually implementing your analytics program today. Is it trained analytics experts in-house, relying on third parties or consultants, implementing analytics but without specialists, or none of the above? Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. We've got 59% of you responding there. Let's have a look at the results. So 41% of you say that you'd be looking to implement analytics without the assistance of specialists. 34% of you saying that you're relying on trained analytics experts in-house. 12% of you saying that you're looking to bring in consultants or third parties to assist. And finally, 12% of you saying none of the above, not yet looking at implementing analytics just yet. Interesting results. Back to you, please, Vince.
All right. So I think those are interesting results. I think that they're pretty consistent with the poll results. So So how are you using analytics in the shared services environment? As you see, remember the poll results was 34% were using trained specialists, so very, very consistent here. In-house, but without trained specialists, just over half. And then the third bucket that I kind of put together in partnership with a business service provider, BPO, or another third-party analytics provider. So I would say from the EXL perspective, analytics, data analytics, which is really focused on big data, is our fastest growing business. It grew more than 50% in the last year. That's really the big data, the predictive analytics, and focused on a couple of our focus verticals, insurance, healthcare, et cetera, but also banking and financial services. So I think the key here, the lesson I would draw is you don't have to have rocket scientists to do this. You start with someone who has a critical thought process and wants to know why. Why is this? What is driving this number? And that's a key way to start. And you can have people who are obviously specialized in that. That's really their focus. And I think that really gets to their skill set and mindset particularly. All right, so what can we learn from all of these trends? And I think what we can learn is really three things. And one I think is particularly important is, your competitors are using analytics. You saw the numbers before about the number of people who are either using analytics today or intend to do so quickly. So, as I know you all would appreciate, if you're not doing it, somebody else will, and you don't want to be losing out to your competition because they're doing something creative to reduce costs, improve cycle time, et cetera. Whatever it is, you don't want to be losing out to them. So you need to stay on top of that to remain competitive. I think that we've given you some examples of some quick wins that you might be missing. And again, I look at it from the standpoint of it doesn't have to be a huge win to start generating inertia, to start generating enthusiasm in the rest of the organization. And shared services can lead the charge by talking about the kinds of things that we've talked about, whether it's use of analytics in collections to improve DSO, whether it's use of analytics in spend analysis to reduce the operating to improve the operating margins, whatever it is, shared services can clearly take a significant role in that. And then the third is you need a plan, and that plan probably starts with an assessment of how clean is your data, and then do you have the right resources to really look at the numbers and to draw some conclusions and take some actions. So let's turn to the 7 rules of analytics. And I'm going to let David do this. And by the way, David is, really, I refer to him in a trust me, a very positive way. He is a real data geek. David is one of the guys I know who really enjoys looking at data and getting into this. So I listen very carefully to him. I think he taught me a lot. So David, you want to start with the 7 rules?
I certainly do. Thank you very much, Vince. One of the things to keep in mind here is really knowing where you're starting. And again, I want to hit a point that I hit a little earlier is you have to know that what you're looking at is complete and accurate. It's really, really imperative that you have that foundation. Otherwise, nothing you do will matter. And then really start digging in. Vince made the point earlier, what looks weird? What's your question? What are you trying to figure out? And how does it look across the organization and the process? And I think one of the really important things also foundational here is you have to look to turn your data into information. If you just have data for the sake of data and you blast, 150,000 row spreadsheet across to somebody, it might have nuggets embedded in there, but they're never going to find them. So know where you're starting and know where you're trying to go from there. So then let's look at it too from the perspective of both a science and an art. One of the things to keep in mind here really is if you have data that is out of context, it is really of little or no value. So make sure that the data that you're looking at is also very relevant to what you're thinking about. And I think in here you have to engage your people in not only how they think, but what they know, and again, this really is thinking about the business, thinking about it across the functions. You can have these hardcore data analysts, you can have the science and tear things apart, but if you can't bring that into the context of the business process, if you can't bring that into the context of something that somebody understands, it doesn't really do you any good to tear something apart. So, Vince, I believe that you had some thoughts here in the outsource world as to how this would work.
Yeah, my thought here is really kind of that I agree with everything you've said, and I think it's really important that you have people doing data analysis who not only understand the mechanics of the analysis, but understand the organization, right? Because that really puts, as you said, context around it. But I also think, kind of taking a contrary view, that it can be really beneficial to use a third party, and that would include for outsourcer or firm that just does data analytics, because they can provide, first of all, fresh perspective, may provide a different analytical technique than you might have been applying. And the other is, of course, we're typically operating in multiple client environments. So we can take learnings from one environment and on a more generic basis share that across clients. So you get the benefit of learnings and the applications of the things that we've done for other clients and apply them to your own.
Excellent. So let's look now at expert translation skills, and let's talk a little bit about what that means. And to do that, let me go back to referencing my unapplied cash point. When we went through the information, we came up with some great information that we believed could help the sales organization gain revenue. Again, great point, but not relevant if we can't translate that into recommendations, and more importantly, into recommendations that the sales organization would agree with and would take action on. So what we did was we engaged a couple of the sales leaders. We talked about what we found. We showed them the information. We didn't show them 150,000 rows. We showed them a small chunk of the data, and we worked with them to say, hey, let me show you the dollars, but let's talk about how can we present this information to your sales team so that they will look at it, they will understand it, and then they will take action against it. Because again, if we dumped gobs of data on the sales organization, they're not normally going to go pour through that and look for their information. So what we did is we broke it down and made it very individual so that each salesperson could find their relevant customers. They could find the invoices and the issues that created the duplicate payment, and they would be able to go back very specifically to their customer base and have a very intelligent and relevant conversation, ultimately with the goal being leading to bringing in additional revenue. So again, you can do the greatest piece of analytics in the world, but if you can't explain it to somebody, it's not relevant. So let's move then to talking about resources for change and action. And again, one of the keys here is you can make very key findings. You can absolutely have something that is very good information as you pour through the analytics. But make sure that you make a part of your analysis process understanding, what do I need to do with this information? How do I do it? How do I get those savings? Again, looking back at my duplicate payment example, that wasn't something that from a shared service perspective we were going to be able to do, making phone calls to our customers. So from a resource perspective, we needed to engage the sales organization in doing that. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about from that example is we also needed to go back to the order entry process and talk with that team and get them to do some work to say, why do we keep getting duplicate payments? How do we prevent those from happening? So in doing that, again, we had our analysis well done, well documented. It sold itself as an idea, and then we were able to go and get the staffing model off of that. So it's important to bring that in as part of your analysis and in order to make the analysis complete. Okay, then another important point, and one that we've talked about several times, is really applying it to the end-to-end process. I mentioned earlier that at times in shared services, we can get stuck in our silo. We can get locked into working really, really hard, and we can get locked into that our role is to fix everybody else's defects. One of the things to really avoid here in the analytic process is locking in exclusively to transactional and efficiency-only things. You know, don't miss the big picture. Look at the process improvements across the process, across the function, and drive that out. I think the thing I would tell you, and I found this very consistent, people will appreciate that, and people will respond to that. Solid analytics sells. It absolutely sells. And you may have something that you view as very controversial, but if you drive it with facts as a general statement, people will respond to that. And I think that really flows nicely into the point number 6, which is really bolster your business case by showcasing quick wins. You undoubtedly will have times where you have something that you believe is the most phenomenal piece of analytics and the most phenomenal solution ever in the world, but it's big. And people might look at that and be intimidated at times by the vastness of the project that you're trying to get rolling. One of the things to keep in mind is break it down. Through that analytics, you can often see different pieces. You may have a 5-step project that you want to work on. Grab one of the steps, make it a success, and then analyze that and present your findings, present your wins to the leadership, to the organization. And that really hits the point in here about gaining followers and believers. One of the things you will find is, especially if you are doing really hardcore analysis, it's really easy to get really close to it and know it really, really well. You have to understand that the people you're talking to don't know it as well as you do. So bring them along. Engage your skeptics, but engage them by showing them wins. Okay? Then let's talk about the culture, and I think this is perhaps one of the most important points embedded within here. I talk a lot at times about, you know, GE would tout the Six Sigma savings that they gained. But one of the things they really did is they created a culture of analytics. Everybody wasn't doing regression analysis and doing these you know, statistical anomaly analytics from Six Sigma. What they created was a way to find defects, find the source of the defects, fix the defect, and then look at and tout how they save time, save money, improve the business process, and improve the business partner experience. So what they did is they bred a culture of people thinking in an analytic manner, which then led to a common language for people. It led to common measurements, and it really, most importantly, led to continuous improvement and continuous savings for the organization and yielded them huge, huge savings. So the key here, again, going back to our "it's not rocket science" comment earlier, it's nice to have some scientists and have them really ripping the thing apart, but you want to have your whole organization thinking along this manner. So let me pass it back to Vince to kind of provide some wrap-up comments.
All right, thank you, David. So yeah, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. I think from my perspective, and obviously this depends on where you are in your journey for data analysis, but shared services organizations, I think, are uniquely positioned to be able to add a lot of value to the organization through use of analytics, not only for the functions that they manage, whether it's F&A, procurement, et cetera, but also to help the organization understand the benefits of applying analytical techniques. And I also think that there's a real opportunity for shared services organizations to grow the shared services organization in itself by showing, demonstrating that they have those kinds of skill sets and that they can add value using analytics, and maybe then take that next step and become more of a centralized but internal provider of the analytics on big data. So help the organization go beyond the starting point, which is looking internally and mastering that, and then going and looking at the predictive metrics that really are having so much play in the news. So let's wrap that up. Susie, do we have some questions?
That's great. Many thanks, David. Many thanks, Vince. So now's your opportunity to get any final questions that you are seeking to have answered. So scoot those through to me, please, and let's press on with some questions that have come through. So let's maybe start with you, Vince. How, in your opinion, how does analytics assist, or how can analytics assist with financial and operations audit?
I'm sorry, with the audit approach? I think if I understand the question correctly,
yes.
Yeah, how can analytics help in audits? I think analytics can help by the audit approach by helping to identify, as we talked about before, what looks strange, to help to identify outlying transactions so that the audit function, whether it's an internal audit or external audit, can focus on those to understand them and make sure that there's not an issue with those. So you can use that to support it and to, again, look to make sure that those kinds of outlying transactions are appropriate and were handled appropriately and reported appropriately.
David, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, one of the key things to keep in mind here too, and one of the things we try to do is stay ahead of audits and use analytics at times to create exception reports. As Vince mentioned, and we talked a couple of times, what looks weird? Build exception reports around something that moves outside of the parameters of your process. And report on it. And if you have those, oftentimes you can, number one, cut off a problem that would have been an audit problem. Number two, you can oftentimes show somebody, yeah, that looks weird and it would trigger the audit bells, but it's okay, and here's why, because we knew that happened and we knew why it happened. So look at that as a proactive opportunity through analytics to build exception reports.
Great. Let's move on to our next question. Again, I'll put it to both of you, but I'll start with Vince. So big data analytics, and we're talking about a term small data here, but the specific question is actually more around big data analytics. Where should that actually sit within the organization?
Well, I think that really depends largely on the industry. I think what we've seen in our client base is that big data, again, in our client base, our folks, a couple of our focus verticals are insurance, both life, property and casualty, and health insurance. And there you see that falling under, operations. And in one example that I know we've developed with a number of clients is we use a huge amount of historic information on claims to identify at the moment of first claim. So the first notice of claim is when, I hit my car into a tree, and I call and say, hey, I hit a tree. At that moment, you can use predictive analytics to help show what that claim is likely to end up being, and you can then assign a claim adjuster based on seniority and to really focus on, obviously, getting customer service, but minimizing the claim. So in that case, it's appropriate that would be within the claims adjustment organization. But for other things, it might be in the sales and marketing organization. If you're looking for, predictive metrics and big data for revenue generation purposes, I think today a lot of organizations include those analytical teams in sales and marketing organizations. But I think that's still an opportunity for shared services to demonstrate those kinds of skills and then to offer that to parts of the organization.
Yes, and let me
you,
throw something out here too. One of the things that I see is in something we touched on. Big data yields insights, and particularly if you're looking at sales and marketing, it can often show people an opportunity where shared services has to engage. Again, is hopefully it has a seat at the table, is to say, okay, that is an opportunity, but in going after that, how do we do that? What's the process? What are the inherent costs with that? So it's not that the big data analysis is incorrect. It's absolutely accurate. It's hardcore locked in, but then you have to take it to the next level. Sometimes the answer is it can be phenomenally successful and cost effective. Sometimes the answer is, yeah, that's a good concept, but let's look at the cost. So bridge the gap and bring it down to the point where everybody can understand it. So definitely do the big data, bring it then down into something that is relevant and can be sent across the functions.
Okay, good, thank you. I'll start with David on this one, actually. It's a topic that you talked about in one of your 7 rules, but there's a slight nuance to this question. How can we develop analytics as a culture for newly set up shared services? What you obviously touched on that, but are there further tips that you can give for a newly set up shared services organization, David?
Absolutely. And I've been through this on a couple of occasions. You have to find a way to raise really the level of curiosity in a couple of ways. One, just be curious yourself as a leader, but also create an environment where that is respected and honored, where people can ask difficult and sometimes politically incorrect questions. One of the things to do there that I have used to help people is maybe grab a chunk of data, a chunk of information, and perhaps an Excel spreadsheet, shine it on the wall, and bring a group of people in the room, and let everybody look at it and help people work through what does it tell you. Sort the data, look at it in different ways, and just get people thinking about that. And you'll engage their brains once they know that it's okay, once they start to do it and they see that that it's not rocket science, that you don't have to have these scientists necessarily in the shared services arena to do that. People really tend to engage in that. And then again, go to what we talked about, quick wins. In that arena, some of your skeptics are your own people. Show them a win, get the win, and then shine it on the wall in a town hall meeting or something and say, folks, let me show you the impact that we had. We did this piece of analytics. We did this work. We went beyond our walls, and we impacted the organization, and the organization liked it, and we saved money. That's really, really important to help people understand that.
Okay, good. I'm not going to push the same question through to you, Vince, because we've got 2 last questions, both of which are very, very good. So I just want to make sure that we've got time to have those answered. One question is around metrics. So to what degree do you actually know that you're measuring, you're analyzing successfully? The full question is, please suggest and throw some light on what are the industry-wide metrics for measuring different types of analytics success. David or Vince, who would like to take that question?
Yeah, let me start with metrics. I mean, there are probably hundreds of different metrics that a shared services organization can develop, and I think they start with kind of the end goal. So customer satisfaction. How satisfied are your internal customers? How satisfied are your external stakeholders? So, vendors if you're processing accounts payable, customers in terms of, the way you're handling cash applications and collections, etc. So it's important to have metrics, but don't have metrics just for metrics' sake. I would say, Blue Links, David's company is one of my clients, and we have 17 service level areas. That's it, 17. But we also measure a number of other things, and we measure those things again just to give us an idea of, is there something going on that looks weird? So, it's really important to do that. And frankly, going back to the previous question, Susie, I think it's important to start that right at the beginning when you create a new shared services center. So create that organization that's focused on data and facts, and also improving the process, and then communicating that to your customers.
Okay. David, anything you'd like to add? How do you know, what metrics do you use to see that your analytics initiatives are being done successfully? We can apply metrics to automation programs or compliancy programs. What are the metrics we put to an analytics program to see it's being successful?
A couple of keys here. One being you really have to understand the process that you're evaluating, and oftentimes people don't. So make sure that you understand that and you understand end-to-end. So are you measuring the effectiveness of the procure-to-pay process, or are you measuring the effectiveness of the accounts payable process, or are you trying to measure both? The other thing that's really important here, don't be afraid to bring on a new metric as you're trying to evaluate and wipe out a defect. And then once you wipe it out, don't be afraid to get rid of the metric, because some of your metrics will become irrelevant. So there are some that are very valuable for maybe a 6-month period as you're doing a cleanup in the shared service arena. And then once you've got it cleaned up, put an exception report on it that monitors it, but stop doing the other metrics, because it's not relevant anymore, and you'll see the impact of the improvement, and you'll know when you can stop looking at that, when the end-to-end process, your end metric, it shows the improvement.
Okay, I'm afraid we don't have time for the final question, but what I will say is that the person that asked it will be responded to directly. We are out of time. Ladies and gentlemen, please do make sure that you find out about our upcoming schedule. Shared Services Link has just launched their 2015 events schedule, so familiarise yourself with that, please. But certainly to note, we have a conference in 2 weeks on VAT compliance. We've just launched our March Leaders event for Europe, which one of the streams is on analytics, and we have our dynamic discounting event and supply chain financing event taking place in Scottsdale in February. Also, we have some great webinars for you coming up that you really need to be joining too. Thank you very much to David and to Vince and to your good selves, and we look forward to welcoming you next time. Goodbye.